Hello, in this special episode for International Women's Day, myself, Faye Forbes, Diversity and Equality Apprentice, and Alex Owen, Academic Developer, sat down with Dr. Gemma Ahern, University Teacher in Criminology at the University of Liverpool, and Dr. Ula McClurg, Tenure Track Fellow in the University of Liverpool Institute of Systems, Molecular and Integrative Biology, to talk about their first-hand experiences of suffering with endometriosis. We discussed the impact that endometriosis has on their lives and some of the ways we, as colleagues working in HA, could support those suffering from the condition. We hope you enjoy.
Thank you both so much for your time. Before we start, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you've arrived at your roles that you're in today?
Yeah, so I've had quite an unusual journey or career trajectory. I've worked in a whole host of jobs and industries completely unrelated to academia. I came to university when I was 18, dropped out, pursued those alternatives, and then at 25 I came back as a mature student, and then I got offered the chance of a fully funded PhD and I took it. And then so for the last 8 years I've been working in a range of different lecturing and teaching roles. But I started at the University of Liverpool in the School of Law and Social Justice in September 2019. And yeah, I've been here since.
Brilliant. And what's your PhD focused on?
My PhD was focusing on the experiences of sex workers in prison. And for the last nearly 20 years, I've been working with sex workers in a range of capacities and doing a lot of activism surrounding sex workers' rights.
Wonderful. That's really interesting. Thank you. And Ursula, what about yourself?
Because I had a very standard academic journey. I did my undergraduate degree in Poland, where I'm from. And then I got a grant from the European Union called Erasmus. It's a really popular European Union program where you get to spend part of your degree abroad, and I chose Britain. And when I came here, I guess I liked it enough that, and I was offered then a funded master's here, so I ended up staying. After that, I got my PhD offer in Leeds. I followed that with some postdocs in the north, and then some time in Sweden, and I then got my group leadership independent research position at Liverpool. So I moved here November 2018 to start my group, and I've been here ever since.
Wonderful. And what's your research specialism?
So I work in cancer research and generally sort of fundamental biology. So my group looks at why are proteins and genes associated with reproduction reactivated in cancer, and how does that happen, this repurposing of function.
Great. So two colleagues with quite different backgrounds, but you've both ended up at the university, and it's lovely to talk to you today.
Yeah, so I was personally diagnosed with endometriosis at the age of 18, and that's why I wanted to put together this podcast special series for International Women's Day. Could you tell me how long you have suffered from endometriosis?
So I've actually had a really long journey to be diagnosed with it, and I've suffered from it since I started my periods really young. I was like 9, and I knew straight away that the pain I was in, I didn't feel was normal. But obviously starting so young, people just told me that's what periods are, get over it kind of thing, because as women we're socialised into normalising a lot of the levels of pain we're in, and obviously being that young you don't really have anything to gauge it against. And then I only got diagnosed after my 3rd surgery, so I was nearly 33 then, and at the moment I'm waiting for my 4th surgery to remove more endometriosis, which just keeps growing back more and more, and an ovarian cyst. So it's been a long time, and I just feel with a lot of women waiting so long, it's a long time to get recognition and acknowledgement of what you're going through. So it's great when people can be diagnosed young, because then you can deal with all those secondary factors that are going to impact your life.
Yeah.
That way, I guess I'm a lot more similar to Gemma. I also had a very long journey, and I think what is kind of highlighted by academia, many of us in academia move countries a lot, as I have, and that really doesn't help having consistent care or diagnosis. So I started my periods when I think I was 11, and I also felt at the time that this could not be normal. And however, now I understand that my mom also has endometriosis that was never diagnosed, but because hers were just as brutal as mine, you know, she kind of reassured me that this is normal. I always knew things were wrong, and I guess for me, because my endometriosis, the way it grows, it really affects my bladder and urethra. So I kept having a lot of different treatments and procedures because of those symptoms. But it really wasn't until my sort of mid-30s when a surgery put it together that it's actually endometriosis. And so obviously you cannot have a conclusive diagnosis until it's surgical. But yeah, it was well in my 30s when that happened.
Yeah, so both quite long journeys. So I consider myself very lucky because I started my periods when I was 14. I remember my first period, the pain was unreal. And I was thinking, how do women go through this until they hit like the menopause? Because if I've got like 20, 30 years of this, I can't do it. But then obviously I was fortunate because I got diagnosed when I was 18. And then I'm now waiting for my second operation. Because I think, obviously, I can't tell, but I know my body and it has come back. It sounds stupid, I can feel it. But obviously, with COVID, that's probably going to get delayed even more.
So, Ursula, listening to all three of your stories, actually, and also doing some research on this, one of the things that seems to come up a lot is that this length of time it takes to get a diagnosis. Why do you think that is? If this was some other kind of condition, we'd be diagnosing quite quickly. But it seems that, I mean, Faye, correct me if I'm wrong because you're educating me on this. It's up to 10 years, isn't it, that people can be diagnosed? Why is it taking so long, Ursula?
Yes, 10 years is actually the average. So for some people, it's a lot longer than that. I think Gemma alluded to this really well, and I guess this yields itself to a lot of what she works on as well. I think there really is that aspect that periods are painful and women are sensitive and delicate and a bit, hysterical, like how we used to be, labeled back in the day. So many doctors, when you come to them and you say that, there's just this mistrust of us knowing our own bodies. And then there is that belief that if you come and you say that, you have very painful periods, that they're so heavy, that there is so many other things happening, that is just you being hysterical or lazy or looking for accommodation where you don't deserve one. And I think then another aspect of this is that, and that I've noticed, I think is even more of a problem in British culture, that it is so uncomfortable to talk about periods. So even male doctors are often completely uncomfortable and unaware. It's not something that women find comfortable to talk about to one another. So in a culture I come from, it's a lot more normal. Even in mixed company, it's just a natural physiological function, and you could just say you're on your period, for example. That is not really socially acceptable here. Mm-hmm. So as a result, I think so many women don't have that scale of comparison. And I think that family history, we still don't understand enough of endometriosis, but family history is actually quite common. So then as a result, if the main people you look for comparison with are people who suffer quite similarly as you will be reassured that, yes, this is just what it's like. So then you don't go farther. And then obviously when you do go farther, we all have these horror stories of the doctors that tell you to just suck it up. And that puts you off even further. So yeah, I think it's a mix of this being a female-only issue and so many clinicians being male, an issue of the female perception in society, and then the issue of not having the societal space to compare what the normal is.
Yeah, absolutely. So Gemma, would you say that that's your experience as well in terms of your diagnosis history?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think all of the points Ashley made then were absolutely spot on, and particularly the idea that women can't, in this culture anyway, openly just speak about periods and our bodies and our experiences. And that's so strange, like women being able to, even as Ursula said, in mixed company as well, being able to say I'm on my period, that shouldn't be a stigmatized thing, and yet it is. And in some of the lectures I teach in criminology and sociology, and even sometimes when I'm teaching about women's bodies and the regulation of women's bodies in the media, And we talk about periods and adverts for sanitary towels or tampons on the TV, and how they now show the red blood. So it's blue blood. Our bodies are always sanitized and removed from what they actually are. So I think, yeah, there's this stigma around periods, around women talking about them, and around women talking too much. People might say, how are you? And even if they know you've got endometriosis, they still expect a quite sanitized, nice answer. And if we say too much, a lot of people, it grosses them out, it freaks them out because of how we've been socialized.
So Gemma, how do we change that? I'm bringing up 2 teenage girls, and we've tried to normalize this conversation. Even if I'm really honest, it's uncomfortable for me because I'm of the generation where we didn't talk about periods, but I'm really trying to have those conversations and make it normal and chat, openly about periods in our house. How do we change the conversation, or at least start the conversation? How do we change our culture so that people are more accepting of having these discussions?
I think the more we talk about it, the more normalised it will become. Maybe I'm a bit idealistic, but that's what I think, just starting those conversations. And I think in terms of the workplace as well, some workplaces now are endometriosis friendly workplaces, so getting a strategy and working for that as the end goal. But yeah, starting conversations and not knowing all the answers, but just being prepared to maybe be uncomfortable and sit in that discomfort, but talk and share.
Great. And Ursula, you said that just comparing the 2 cultures of Poland and then the UK, they are quite different. What can we learn from your culture in terms of where obviously conversation has been normalized?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult because I think we're just generally a slightly obnoxious nation. So for us, every conversation is normalized because we're just very in your face. But I think a lot like how Gemma said that, I think it will only come with time. So I actually have quite little hope that this will really affect my generation, for example. Well, I think the more people bring up kids like you do, Alex, where this starts being normal at home, I think if you assume something to be normal, it will then become normal. So these kids, when they go to school, they'll talk about it as normal, and that will move forward. But yeah, I don't really know, because the cultures are so different. I don't really know how we could adapt something for just that aspect to work.
Sure.
But yeah, I think it is coming to the conversation of the attitude that this is a topic you can touch on.
Yeah, so it's about attitude and conversation and keeping that dialogue flowing. Great.
I think as well it's education, because I remember when I first had sex education in school, I remember with us, we literally got given a sanitary towel and it got passed around student to student. And they were like, yeah, feel it, have a feel, this is what it's like. And then told you how to do it, how to put a towel in, things like that. But I think the education around, listen, this is normal. When you're on your period, you might get a bit of discomfort, you might be tired, things like that. But if you're experiencing pain to the point where it's interfering with your everyday life, that's not normal. And if that's the case, and then provide steps on what to do next if you are having abnormal periods. And I think it's in the education sector as well where I think it can be tackled. But again, I think it is generations. I know my generation, I'm 23. On Instagram, there's a lot of women who have accounts who suffer from endometriosis, and they raise awareness. And you have got that social media aspect of it now where I do think with generations I'm quite open. Sometimes people might think I'm too open on my symptoms and things like that. But I do think it's a generational thing where as generations move on, it will get easier to speak about. I know if I have children and I had a girl, for example, even a boy, you might have, if I had a boy, you might have a girlfriend when you're older and she could suffer this. Be aware of it. It's not just down to women to flag it up. Also, males, boys, need teaching on it as well. If they have a partner and they're experiencing symptoms, they can flag it up and be like, well, is that normal? And start that conversation. So I think it is massive on education. I know for me, the area of my life which endometriosis has impacted me. I mean, there's a lot, to be honest, but For me, I think it would be that loneliness, I think is a big part of it, because if, for example, middle of the night, things are always worse if like anything pain-wise, and not so much now because I've got my boyfriend, but when I was a teenager, the pains that I would experience, but at night you're alone.
Yeah, and I'm guessing that's really scary for a teenager. I mean, I've never been in pain other than I've birthed 2 children, and believe me, that's pain like I've never experienced. But at least then I had the medical professionals around me. So even though it was scary, I was in control. Whereas I'm guessing as a teenager, lying awake at night on your own with unbearable pain, that must have been really, really scary.
Yeah, so I definitely think loneliness and even now, my boyfriend is very supportive. Gives me like back massage when I got back pain and things like that. But it's still lonely because he can't physically understand what I'm going through. He can never really relate and truly understand what it is that's going on because he can't experience it. So even then, I think it's that aspect of still being lonely, because unless someone around you does experience it, you can't relate to anyone. And when you do have a conversation, say with my mum's obviously sympathetic and knows, oh, it's endometriosis. But again, my mum's never experienced it, so she can't fully understand like what I'm saying. It gets to the point maybe where you don't want to talk about it because of that, because there is no understanding. But I think as well, it can be relationships, whether that's with your boyfriend. Sex can be really painful, for example. That has an effect on your relationships with your parents. If you're having a bad, most days, discomfort or painful, you go down every morning, how are you? Oh, I'm in pain. Day after day, it starts to become, oh, there's something wrong with her again. So it gets to the point where you maybe have a breakdown relationship because of that. I don't know if Gemma, Ursula, if you experience the same things, or what it is in your life that it impacts most on.
I think what you said there, what Alex said, and then what you, Faye, said was really interesting. So I've got lots of friends who have gone on to have children who have endometriosis, and they actually didn't have any pain relief during birth because they were waiting for it to get as bad as it does during their normal ovulation or period before they would accept the pain relief. And it never got that bad. And I know everyone's pain's different and pain's so subjective, and I'm not suggesting that's the same for everybody, but I think that just illustrates how much pain we are in, where women who have had children actually say birth for them wasn't as painful as what they experience on a monthly basis. And then that makes me quite angry that a lot of people in the society or in the medical world don't take our pain seriously when that is the level of pain we're dealing with constantly. So I think for me, a lot of what it impacts on is definitely I don't like being how I call flaky. I don't like letting people down, like in non-COVID times when we actually have a social life. I don't like letting people down, and sometimes it feels like I might do that a lot because some of the secondary conditions I suffer with as a result of endometriosis, like Ursula said, things to do with my bladder, things to do with my bowel. I have a lot of stomach upsets. I've got colitis now. A lot of my adhesions around my bowel and constrict my bowel. And again, they're things people don't like to talk about. So even if they are on board with talking about periods and endo, the actual lived reality of that in terms of bladder problems, bowel problems, people in our culture don't like talking about those things either. And I think as well, in terms of like, I'm married, I've been with my husband for 16 years and he's really, really supportive. But I think as well, it's a wider societal issue that we need to redefine what sex is as well, because sex is not just penetration. And often people want to fix us to fix that problem. And I've got an amazing gynecologist now who's just wonderful, who doesn't see sex as just being penetration, and therefore you don't feel like a freak if that is painful for you, or if that is a problem. And I just think that holistic approach has really helped me. And obviously, as a bit of an annoying sociologist, criminologist, that's something I bang on about all the time anyway. But I think that's important for how we understand our bodies, the spectrum of which we understand sex, that things are going to be painful for different women, things are going to be pleasurable for different women, and again, opening up those conversations. And
thanks for sharing that, Gemma. And what impact does all of that have on your mental health, if you wouldn't mind sharing? Because obviously, you know, there's the physical that we're talking about here, but also there's the knock-on effect in terms of your mental health.
Yeah, I mean, I suffer with mental health anyway, but it definitely can make me feel down. It can make me feel anxious certain times of the month for around ovulation, particularly now since I've got this ovarian cyst. I don't know why it is hormonally, but it makes me really anxious. And I think, yeah, what Faye said, like, it doesn't matter how many people I've got around me, you can feel lonely because you can feel different. You can feel like your body's failed you in some way. You can just feel frustrated. So yeah, just feeling, you know, down, maybe a bit isolated, even if you're not actually isolated, but just that feeling.
And what about yourself, Ursula?
I think what Gemma's touched on now is also another really important aspect that I don't think many doctors really know enough about, or I don't know, explore enough in their head. And I do say that as someone who actually teaches at medicine degrees, is the side effects of some treatments that can happen on mental health as well. So, you know, how Gemma's mentioned that her cyst is causing her anxiety. That's actually not that uncommon, because the way hormones change can really regulate your fear and your adrenaline level and your stress levels. So, for example, one of the hormonal treatments I had for endometriosis after one of my surgeries was giving me panic attacks for 3 years, and they were horrendous. And it's not something I've suffered with before. And then as a result, I had to actually seek help and have extra treatment to mitigate the side effects of my first treatment. So it kind of, because it's a disease for which we don't have targeted treatment, targeted therapy, you're just given random things that might help, but actually are for something else. As a result, you then develop a lot of random side effects of these things, and then get secondary problems from the treatment that isn't well targeted in the first place. So the anxiety and sort of panic attacks effect is quite a common one. Many of us suffer because of the way, you know, our body shoots hormones all wrong, and then on top of it, we are loaded with different hormonal treatments. In some countries, you get things akin to chemotherapy for endo. You know, we are given all sorts of really aggressive therapeutics without really sometimes much thought being put into it. And then also without that holistic approach of actually checking, you know, how does that make you think? If we gave people on chemotherapy, it's obviously, you know, necessary, but we do understand that then they get horrendous nausea, they get hair loss. Some of this we can mitigate, some of this we can't. With endo, there is just this like, oh, just take this, maybe it will help. I'll never check in what else happened. And that can really be quite dramatic.
Well, thank you to all three of you for being so honest about the impact of this condition on your lives. And this podcast really does seek to support colleagues working in or with HE to share their experiences, but also to develop our practices, including how we can support our co-workers and students. So just sharing from your experience, what is the biggest challenge you would say you face living with endometriosis? And specifically, what would you say is the biggest challenge for you in the workplace in terms of managing your endometriosis, if we really focus on supporting colleagues in HE to understand your condition?
I mean, I guess, you know, you can make that list as big or as small as you want. It could be endless. But I think a lot of people, that's not something people want to talk to you about. And I think also a lot of leadership is very worried that we will ask for huge things, and we will ask for like money, mitigation, tenure. So no one wants to touch that subject because there is this assumption we are definitely unrealistic. Well, actually, I think a lot of things that I would really want are really small and wouldn't cost anyone a penny, but they would change my life, and not just mine, but a lot of other people, like Crohn's, dystrophy. You know, we get to meet each other a lot at scientific conferences because you see people have the same problems. So I think for me, sometimes if someone just asked, you know, know if there is someone in leadership and they know you suffer with something, just don't be so afraid to ask if they could help, because maybe we're not going to ask for money. And then the other things are actually quite practical. So for example, at least in my field, conferences are a big part of our career progression and something we really need to do. A standard setup of a conference is that, especially when you're more junior, you would present a poster, which means you would stand by it, physically stand, there are no chairs, for 3 hours on average. And even if you don't present a poster and you want to see other posters, you have to stand by them for those hours. There really are no chairs. And that, to me, and that's why I know so many people in my field who have other conditions like Crohn's or dystrophies, because you start to recognize people who suffer in the same way, because to me that was never really possible. And you try to mitigate for it, but like, you know, it wouldn't cost anyone anything to just rethink that a little bit. Is there a way we could do this where there are optional chairs, or we make the corridors a bit wider? Like, it's just, I think because most people are not suffering from chronic pain or disabled, I don't blame them in any way, that they just, when they designed this, it never crossed their mind this would be a problem. But I think that's why it's so important to have these conversations, that we actually learn, you know, well, maybe that's hard for some of us. So, you know, maybe just think of another way. And then for me, the other thing is, I think funders, so the field I'm in, you would be expected to gain your own funding quite repeatedly. And a lot of this is counted by the amount of time you spend from your PhD makes you eligible for different things. And obviously, the farther you go, the more you only have the very competitive, difficult schemes to apply for. And there is a lot of recognition now, which women have really fought for, that if you, for example, have a child, or even if you adopt a child, you will not come back at 100% immediately. So your clock stops not just for maternity leave, you get extra 6 months for every child you had of delayed clock. And that's also often given to men who had a kid, with also that acceptance that there is sleep deprivation, there is, you know, distraction. However, for whatever reason, we do not have that acceptance for people who have surgeries. So if I have a month off for surgical recovery, my clock only stops for that month, and I have to provide a huge amount of documentation to prove that. No Royal Society, Wellcome Trust, no funder gives that allowance that it's not that different in that context than childbirth. You know, your body is ruined, and it takes a while to get back to that 100%. So, you know, if that clock could just accept that people with chronic conditions, you know, and I don't know, a year per chronic condition, or 6 months per chronic condition, or extra 4 months for every surgical recovery of over a month, you know, some kind of calculation. But, and, you know, this will not just affect people with endo, people with Crohn's, or with many other, you know, people who have terribly broken leg and had 6 months in, you know, a cast. But you don't come back immediately, right? I'm on, you know, never mind, I've just had all my insides muddled through.
Sure, absolutely. And Gemma, you were saying earlier you're waiting for your 4th surgery. So I'm guessing exactly what Ursula is saying. You need that understanding as well.
Yeah, so I was meant to have an appointment with my consultant in June, and I was hoping maybe for a cancellation surgery in the summer, and obviously COVID stopped that. So when I was finally seen in November, I've got quite a big ovarian cyst. So then I had to wait for bloods to rule out ovarian cancer, because I was having a lot of similar symptoms that can just be related to the cyst, but they had to rule that out, which again was a worry. And I understand COVID stopping things, but there is a feeling from many women in the endometriosis endo community that the suffering that we're going through isn't being taken into consideration at the moment, you know, particularly for women who maybe want to start a family, or just the chronic pain and the management of that. So I just wish that those things were considered. You know, sometimes they're just seen as not being as important as other things, but when the quality of our life can be so reduced, you know, I know people that can't work anymore because of their endometriosis, or they can't work anymore in their chosen profession because of things like Ursula said, you know, not being able to stand up for long periods of time, perhaps not being able to or wanting to travel around the country or internationally for events. And those things can be very difficult when you need access to a toilet frequently, just when you're in so much chronic pain. What I do think and hope is that working from home so much during COVID, or certainly hybrid, I appreciate some people still have to do frontline based work or lab based work, is that adjustments that people in the disabled community or chronic illness community have for forever, who were told they were asking for too much. We've proven now that people can successfully work from home. I'm way more productive actually working like this. I've achieved way more because I'm stuck at home than, you know, when I'm having to travel in all the time and travel around to conferences and so on. So I do hope for things like conferences, the hybrid option remains, that if we can't travel or don't wish to travel, we can still present, and we can present just as well as people that are there. Of course, the networking opportunities are different, but I just hope that people take into account what we've achieved during the pandemic by working online, and that some of those adjustments can continue.
Now, we know that endometriosis is very misunderstood and 54% of people have never heard of it. Do you think from a personal point of view that endometriosis can often be seen as a myth and is not taken seriously by society in general, but also people you have close relationships with?
Yeah, so I mean, I can comment on it from a professional point of view. Currently in Liverpool, I lecture at biomedical, biochemistry, genetics, and degrees like this. And I run a workshop for third-year students on endometriosis. I mean, the workshop is on biomarker analysis, but I made it endometriosis as a case study for obviously particular personal interest reasons. Usually in the group of around 100 students that get there, and you know, those are students who have genuine biomedical interest and training. One or two have heard of it. There always a woman who suffers from it. So it is completely alien to most people. And, you know, the same applies in personal life. I guess I maybe don't really talk about it much in personal life. But yeah, it isn't something that people know about. And I do think that, you know, a lot of people, because of that, like we discussed earlier, perception that periods should be painful, aren't very clear on, you know, is this a real condition? And I think that's why it's so important, you know, I guess Gemma was a bit braver than me, but we talk about the other aspects that, you know, this is not just period that is painful. You literally have bleeding growths throughout your body that contract other tissues. And as a result, the symptoms and the consequences persist every day through the month. You know, if your urethra is completely compacted and closes, that's not just a painful period anymore. You literally, you know, cannot pee. So I think as a consequence, we need to make people more aware that starting the conversation from periods is good, but that's not really like, you know, to me, the period is only a few days a month, they're rubbish, but I wouldn't say that's my biggest problem. My biggest problem is all the other symptoms every day, every month.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, agree with Ursa again there. I'm quite lucky in that, probably because of the discipline that I'm in and other things that we research and talk about, you know, sort of make us maybe more open to talk about periods and these other things as well, because we're often talking about the body in numerous ways. And a lot of my friends have endometriosis, but some of them only got diagnosed after me talking about it for so many years and going on, and they suddenly realised, wow, this isn't normal for me. And also I go to, in non-COVID times, in normal times, I go to a yoga class with my mum, which is a menopause yoga class. You don't have to be going through the menopause. You could be perimenopausal, postmenopausal, nothing to do with the menopause, but it's a yin yoga class, but it's like a women's circle as well. And women talk about their experiences of pain, of childbirth, of maybe different hormonal options they've taken for a variety of things. And that's really empowered me as well to talk about these things really openly and without the stigma being there. And I think I've just had to sort of fight for myself really, even to be taken seriously by the medical profession, by gynecologists, because on my first laparoscopy, I got told I had congested pelvic syndrome. Then on my second laparoscopy, I got told I did have adhesions around my bowel, but they couldn't actually label it endometriosis. And then on my third surgery, she's kept me under anaesthetic for 3.5 hours to get it all out because there was that much. And then I was officially given the label. Well, by then, I was nearly 33 years old. And I've suffered with, as Ursula said, like obviously I don't understand all the medical terms, but hearing it in the way that Ursula's explaining it to me actually makes me quite emotional. Like, because even I sometimes try and downplay my own pain. Even sometimes I think, oh, come on, I'm being dramatic, it can't be that bad. So for instance, I had a really infected gallbladder that has been removed a few years ago, but I really should have gone to A&E when it was that bad, and I didn't, because I convinced myself it's not that bad. And I think, you know, with my cyst as well, I knew that I suffer really badly during ovulation with pain, but never this badly. This has been to the point where I've nearly passed out numerous times. And my husband has said, you need to go to A&E, that's not normal. But I've convinced myself, like, I can cope, it's not that bad. So, yeah, I think it's educating other people about the level of pain we're in, and also maybe being a bit kind, well, for me, being a bit kinder to myself and accepting what's happening to my body, because I don't understand it myself in the medical way that Ursula has explained it.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's so important for us to have these conversations. And I'm just so thankful to all three of you for being so open, because as someone who's, I'm one of those statistics, I'd never even really heard of this condition until Faye educated me about this. And it's really important, you know, that we are aware and we're able to support our colleagues who are going through this. So thank you so much for your honesty. What you've shared is really interesting, and it obviously impacts your lives in many different ways. But if you could summarise, what is the greatest way that this condition impacts your life? What would it be?
For me, the main impact is accepting, if you're a really ambitious and driven person, which I would hope to acknowledge that I am, you really want to be overachieving at work all the time, and you work for this, especially in our career. It's a career we work for all our life. We've given everything up for this, you know, moves, changes in life, you know, private life. It's all this. This is your dream. And to accept that sometimes you are not able to perform as well as you expect of yourself because your body will not do what you ask it to is very difficult. Yeah. And I think often we drive ourselves more ill by not accepting this. I've certainly done that in the past. And that to me is the hardest, that, you know, you have to reconcile in your head this vision of yourself as this driven, hardworking individual with days when you are not as hardworking as you would expect of yourself, and there is nothing you can do about that. And that is hugely detrimental to your self-esteem, your image of yourself, you know, the way you think you deserve your career or don't. It is something for me that I still haven't reconciled with that. It's easier now that I'm a PI because I'm less lab-based. So a lot more of my work is computer-based, which is easier to work through in pain. But when I was 100% lab-based, that used to drive me insane.
And what about you, Gemma? What would you say is the biggest impact?
I think maybe it's hot because I've got other conditions as well, not related to endo as well, chronic based. Maybe I've had to sort of reconcile with myself a long time ago that my life was going to be different. So I am ambitious in a way, you know, if my boss is listening, I very much am. You know? But I've had to really dedicate my life to my health. So one of the conditions that I have is post-traumatic stress disorder. So that really impacts my every day, and I'm open about that as well. But so I suppose I've had to sort of accept it. And sometimes that does make me sad. You know, I do feel like I'm decades behind other people, particularly because I entered academia so late. But then, I don't know, I suppose I've just had to accept it. But I understand I'm in a very different field than Ursula, for example. So there's, you know, it is a very different world. And obviously a lot of what I can do is from home. And as I say, during COVID, that's proved it to me. I'm actually way more productive in this setting because I could be sat here now looking professional, but I could have a hot water bottle stuck down my ovary and my, you know, my big jug of juice here, and I can put the camera off and run the toilet if I need to and carry on and nobody knows. So yeah, I think I've accepted that, but it does still make me sad sometimes, and sometimes it does make me feel like a failure, which is sad.
Yeah, absolutely. What about you, Faye?
Obviously very different situation to Gemma and Ursula, but I obviously went to university and I studied wildlife conservation, but a big part of that is travel. And I know for me, even regards like going on holiday, for example, the anxiety I get before, because I think when you go to a different country, so it's different care, it's different medicine, it's all sorts. But then also, like, if I have a flare up on a flight, what do I do? If I'm above sea, I can't be like, stop the plane, get me off. And the anxiety that gives is, like, I've been sick before because it's been that bad. Do you know what I mean? And I do think in my first year of university as well, that's when I had my operation. I got diagnosed with endometriosis. I did fall behind in that first year really bad. But as I say, half it is the mental battle of, could I go into this field? Am I going to be able to cope? Will I be seen as lazy? Will I be seen as unenthusiastic? Because some days I can sit on a meeting and then my face, probably people look at it and think, oh God, she doesn't look involved, or she's not enthusiastic. But they're looking at me, but then I'm sat there thinking, right now I've got back pain, I've got pain down my leg, I've got headaches, I've got pains up my bum, for example, which is something I get really bad. So, I can't blame myself for sitting here looking, not engaged or things like that, because on the other side of the screen, I'm coping with a lot of stuff that a lot of people maybe aren't aware of.
I think if I can just add one thing, I don't know if anyone else feels like this, but I know there's not a lot positive about endometriosis at all, but I think it's given me a lot more empathy to other people. Like when I look at someone now, whether it's in my personal life, on the street, in work, I always think, I don't know what's happening for you. Anything could be happening behind your facade. So it does make me really try and be radically kind to everyone that I meet, because I don't know the battles that they're facing.
Yeah, I would agree with that massively.
So we like to finish each podcast with 3 or 4 take-home tips that the listeners could reflect on in terms of their own personal practice. So if you could give us a few tips or thoughts to reflect on in relation to this important topic, what would they be? Ursula, we'll start with you.
I would say, similarly to the mental health campaigns that have been recently, don't be afraid to ask people and colleagues or people you are responsible for as a manager, how are they doing? And if you can help, don't always assume they will ask for mountains. And then I guess the other point, I will steal that from Gemma, because that's so true, and it's something I still work on, the empathy. If someone tells you about their pain, maybe just believe them. And also to remember, what could be happening in people's lives, and how much that can be outside of work. Like Faye said, with judging people's enthusiasm by their face and things like that, I do often wonder, is resting bitch face just a pain face? Is this basically just all the people who have chronic pain conditions who are pulling through those meetings? Thinking of the perspective of anyone who would listen who might have endometriosis, I've had it for more than 20 years. I think the most important message I tell myself whenever it's bad again is that the reason they're called flare-up is because they all subside. There is no flare-up that doesn't ease off at some point. It doesn't mean that we will be, healthy like anybody else, but the really bad periods, they always end, and then it always gets a bit better. So if you're going through a flare-up now, it will come down.
Gemma, how about you?
Yeah, I think leading from what Ursula said then as well, that people, line managers or heads of departments or whoever, senior management might think that people are going to ask for mountains. That generally isn't the case. And from a leadership perspective, if you do accommodate people in the ways that they need, you are going to bring out the best from them, because we can work really, really hard. But we just need some of those adjustments in place, and some kindness and some empathy. And just as well as Ursula said, if we tell you that we're in pain, believe us. We don't have to quantify it. We don't have to compare it to some other pain that they've been through that we haven't. Like, we are in pain, and that's the end of it.
Yeah, I'll just add on to Gemma's point there. like your feelings and what you're feeling is completely valid. And, you know, don't let someone say to you, say for example, you have a day where you don't want to move, and that's perfectly fine. Don't let anyone say to you, well, what about them people who are in this position? What about the people who have got, say, cancer, for example? They got up and do things and they carry on with their life as best they can. It would be, don't invalidate people's feelings, because I think that's a huge thing that I'm assuming both Gemma and Ursula have faced as well, and I have.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Brilliant. I really enjoyed that chat with Gemma and Ula. I found their honesty about the impact that endometriosis has had on their lives helpful to really help me to understand how I can help my colleagues suffering from the condition in the future. One of the key aspects that really stood out to me from the conversation was the issue of loneliness and isolation that women often feel because of what is seen as a taboo subject. It was really clear to me that we need to open up about this conversation and start to listen to each other.
Yeah, I found it interesting to hear how the condition affects people differently, both in their personal lives but also in the workplace. It was particularly interesting to hear about the challenges our colleagues in academia face, from work deadlines to attending conferences, and it was certainly an eye-opener to hear what adjustments could be made to help women in the workplace cope better with their condition.
Well, there's lots for us there to think about and to reflect on. If you'd like to take your thinking further, we've added some resources to the website on a specific podcast reading list, which you can access at liverpool.ac.uk/the-academy/podcast. Also, please do let us know what you thought about the episode. You can tweet us at LiveUniAcademy, and you can also find the usual podcast hosts at eLearnerMatt or at Alexandra_Owen on Twitter.
If you have been affected by any of the issues raised in this podcast and would be interested in joining an endometriosis support group, please email us at equality@live.ac.uk.
Great. And we really are grateful for those of you who've taken the time to either rate or review our show in your podcast provider's app. It really does help others find us. Or alternatively, we really do appreciate it when you recommend the podcast to your colleagues. Bye for now.